So good morning everybody, and welcome to another edition of Lisa Barnwell Presents Bumps in the Boardroom, a global conversation on the pregnancy advantage for business. And we're looking at the real value of the pregnancy mind. And I'm delighted today to introduce a speaker to talk to me from 3M. So I'm talking to Katherine Parks, who's a senior HR manager at the diversified technology company 3M, huge company whose innovations improve daily life for millions around the world. And having returned to work full-time in a senior and demanding role following the birth of her son 6 years ago, Katherine's developed a real passion to help others succeed in their aspirations whilst balancing the role of being a senior career woman. So firmly the program can help retain female talent at all levels, particularly in roles. Katherine has a master's degree in strategic human resource management and is a fellow with the Chartered Institute of Personal Development. So thank you, Katherine, for joining us this morning. How are you today?
Morning. Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
Oh, you're going off the screen a little bit then. I hope that's not our techie gremlins coming into us. Are you there?
Yes, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. One moment, maybe that's my... Is that better? Oh, I seem to have lost you.
Hello?
Are we back?
Yep. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I think my, just as we started, I heard this big drilling, and I don't know whether, anyway, so, oh, we're live actually, sorry. So that's, so Katherine, welcome to the Hangout. As we were saying, it's very fantastic to use a Hangout, but it obviously has a side to it that we can't know. I think it was actually the builders outside my house drilling, so they did something to the internet connection. So apologies for that, and welcome to the Hangout this morning. Welcome to Bumps in the Boardroom. Can you hear me, Katherine?
I can indeed. Yes, I can. Yes.
Great.
Yes, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so we're live actually. We're recording. Okay, so let me know. You've been with 3M for how long? When did you join them?
March 2000. So yeah, just over 14 years.
Okay, great. And
quite
so
a while.
you've got a little boy who's 6.
Yes.
Okay, so you've got great experience of building up your career, then building a family, and coming back into the workplace. And that's obviously what we're talking about today, is that transition, that experience. And looking at, it'd be great to know a little bit more about what 3M have in place and what they're planning to do for the future, but also to chat to you about a kind of personal perspective on it. So have you always worked in HR? Is that the area you've always sort of focused on?
Yes, pretty much. My early stages of my career, sort of post-university, were actually in retail, so quite a different environment. But the last sort of 18 years have been spent predominantly in HR, across a number of disciplines, but in HR.
Okay, and in terms of, you know, we were talking yesterday on a call about the planning and the preparation that often can go in to when you're looking to start a family, and when to discuss it with your employers, and how to look at that process. Is that something that you did fairly early on, or were you a bit later? How did that work for you?
No, I interestingly, even being in an HR environment, I was very cautious of being too open about starting a family. I had progressed quite quickly in my early days with 3M. I've been very fortunate to have some really good sponsors in my career, and had worked really quite hard at sort of almost proving myself, and had really quite a thriving career at the time that we decided that a family was the right thing to do. And my initial concern with it was around how that perception of me might change. That I've gone from a totally committed career professional, giving every hour of every day to 3M, to suddenly becoming something, in my view, something quite different. I think it was a perception. I don't actually think it was a reality, but it's how I felt at the time. So actually, I didn't have an open conversation pre-pregnancy with my employer. I just felt that it may mean that I would be overlooked for that next promotion or that next career opportunity, that it would factor in their thinking.
And that's something that we were discussing yesterday, and I think some of it is perception of the individual, and it's a tricky line. You know, you don't want to necessarily test that and see, oh yeah, no, that has affected my career badly. Oh well, I'm glad I tried that out. So we tend to act on the side of caution, but actually I think if we were able to have much more open conversations, I know when I was reading Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, she was talking very much about having much more open conversations and talking about our whole career progression, put my teeth in, and how we can actually integrate, because it's quite reasonable and quite normal to want to have a family, you know, if that's something that you want to have, but also to say, you know, I'm actually really committed to my role and I would love to carry on working for you as well. And I think that's the challenge at the moment for both employees and employers, really opening up a dialogue so that we can actually have these conversations and say, okay, so how do we make this work? How do we make your position work for that time that you need out? And how can we manage it during the time that you're building up to going off on maternity leave and the time when you first come back?
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, reflecting on it actually, and in my role now, advising line managers through this process and individuals as they're struggling with the same thought process and perceptions that I had at that time, and we're 6 years on from that, and they still are concerns for females in this organisation. And I think some of that is actually around recognizing the organization can make positive adjustments for you. Actually, if we put our trust in the organization, we'll use that information for the right reasons. Future planning sort of 18 months out from where you are right now, actually, if you can work in partnership, you can make that much more positive experience. But it's almost allowing people to feel that they have the trust that the organization will use that to the positive rather than to any detriment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, having that trust, having that level of flexibility, feeling, look, I am going to be valued and looked after, and we can work together, I think is definitely the way forward. And I know from other conversations I've had, when that is the situation, that is the case, it works better for both parties. It's a joint agreement, for employer and employee. And I know Geraldine yesterday was talking about her vast model and talking about when women come back, the T at the end stands for trial, and she said basically women are as much feeling like they're on trial when they come back, but also the employer is on trial. And I think that's something that affects a lot of women, even though they're very committed to their career, even though they're very committed to their employer. They are then thinking, okay, how is this going to pan out? How is this going to work for me? And I think the best thing an employer can do is really come in and say, look, fantastic, okay, we have to change some things, we have to look at that, but how can we make this work? Because if you're more fulfilled as a person and you're fulfilled in your personal life, then you're going to bring a much happier self to work and be able to thrive and create. And I know myself, when I'm in a good space and I feel very supported, I feel very nurtured, that's when all my creativity happens. But when I'm feeling on shaky ground and not feeling sure, then I don't do my best work. And so I think that's something very positive for employers to take.
Yeah. And I look back and I think my view on my career and the perception of people around me to an extent influenced how positive I felt about pregnancy. I almost didn't really embrace it. I almost tried to keep it as a secret almost for as long as I possibly could before actually opening up and sharing it. And I didn't go on to have a second child, and I think had I would have really enjoyed and embraced that much more than I did with my son.
Yeah, and I think, we can all look back and see how we would have done things differently, but I think, it is a really special time, and actually what I'm very passionate about is that time. I've spent sort of the last 14 years working with women going through pregnancy, going through their maternity process, and helping them get back into the workplace if that's what they're choosing to do. And the majority of women that I work with do go back to work. They're senior in their careers, they love their careers, and they want to find a good balance. And what I tend to find is that when they hold back, when they have those fears, often it really sort of does impact on them later down the road. And actually, the more we can embrace and the more we can feel authentic at work, I think there's a shift going on about being more honest. A lot more companies now encourage team activities, things after work, and there's much more integration between personal and professional life, and to not keep your personal life so personal. I mean, it's not that you have to share absolutely everything with your colleagues, but I think it's about bringing more of your whole self to the office, and that's something I feel really passionate about. Certainly working in my own business, I guess I've had more freedom to express myself as I've wanted to, and that's the difference when you're part of an organisation, part of a corporation. But actually, when you're allowed to be an individual within that organisation and feel more open, feel more authentic, I do think that's of benefit to everybody.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about 3M, how it's made up. You were giving me some numbers before. So
yeah, it's a global company. Head office is in the North America, in Minnesota. Founded well over 100 years ago now, so 1902. Wow. Founded, and has grown substantially over the years. It has a presence now in 70 countries, employing just over, this figures may have changed slightly, but just over 88,000 employees worldwide. So a hugely diverse company in its in its product offering and business sectors, but also diverse in its workforce. And an organisation which actually I feel very proud to be part of, big corporate organisation, but has a real belief in its people and their sort of singular commitment to delivering on 3M values and principles that underpins pretty much all of our business making decisions.
So it's quite a heartfelt company. I mean, it's people are, as much as it's got great products, it's people are creating those products. So absolutely,
and it truly believes and invests and puts all of the behaviours in place to reinforce that. The UK subsidiary of obviously which I'm part of was founded I think in about 1951. So again has been here for quite some time, employing just over 2,800 people across the whole of the UK and Ireland, across about 19 locations, so quite spread out. Again, a mix of a huge technical laboratory environment, manufacturing locations, distribution centres, and some core sales and marketing. So yeah, hugely diverse.
And in terms of numbers, we were talking about the sort of split of male to female at different levels in the company. And you know, the title we chose for today's talk was Changing the Trajectory of Women to Create a Better World for Everybody. So how is that split at the moment, and what are the plans for the future?
We have a, when you look broadly across the organisation, so when I talk about the organisation, I'm purely talking about the UK, not the broader, and it varies, obviously, it reflects the marketplaces in which 3M has a presence, and that's, again, is one of its philosophies, trying to reflect, and a lot of the work being done is around our workforce reflecting our customer base and our local areas. So if you look at the total organisation as a whole, I think we're probably about 60 to 40 male to female. So actually that looks a pretty good mix of females in the workplace. If you start to segment that and look at where do those females sit, they are much more prevalent at the lower levels of the organisation in the support sort of functions, administrative positions. You look purely at our upper tier of our sort of senior management levels, particularly in our sales and marketing environments, which, you know, we operate in the industrial space in some areas where it's a very male dominated environment. Then you're probably looking more around 80% middle managers as male and 20 female. So it shifts as you go up.
And what plans have you got in place to try and perhaps correct that or change that, improve that?
Yeah, it's something the organisation is very conscious of and has been working for a while to look at what are the influencing factors that stop women progressing. The organisation recognises that isn't about capability. So what is it that almost, with some of our very career-orientated females that sort of deselect themselves out of the process of getting to more senior positions, what is it that's driving that? So there have been some sort of research done in that. There are a number of networks and opportunities for people to give feedback and truly try to understand what our issues are. As we were talking about earlier, one of the major factors in an organisation like 3M is we're a very long-serving organisation. So our workforce and people's time in grade is reflective of a market probably 15 to 20 years ago, where the demographics in the marketplace were very different. So it's a difficult place for 3M to start from. But we are looking at, we have sort of succession planning processes in place. We have development programs that are very targeted at getting women into senior positions. So, you know, almost along the positive discrimination lines, to say, okay, if you've got candidates that are good for a role and one of them is female, let's really look at can that person succeed in that role, to really try and shift the position that we have that is really slightly unbalanced at the moment in the senior levels. The thing that I really like with 3M is that it's not just saying the right things to be seen to be making the right changes. They are actually
ticking the boxes.
They are really standing behind it. Our MD sponsors and is part of our Women's Leadership Network in the UK. He came to the breakfast meeting with one of the presenters, so joined a group of females. They have a steering committee that has at least one other male representation. So that whole looking at diversity and women as being one part of that. But it's a true fundamental belief with 3M that there is a positive benefit in shifting the dial on this, and we have to find a way to do it. But it is difficult. It is really difficult.
What do you think are the biggest challenges to overcome? I mean, obviously you've touched on the fact that you have long-serving employees, but do you think it's also attracting people younger?
Yeah, I think it's in an organisation that ultimately has shareholder value at its core, and therefore productivity challenges will always come along. People's jobs are huge. You know, the expectations placed on middle management, all levels, but certainly at middle management, are quite significant. You feel as an individual that therefore you have to make sacrifices in your personal home life to be able to succeed in your role, to just purely deliver. So, you know, we have got to find a way to allow the true flexibility that people need to get that balance and strike that comfort with not feeling like you're making huge sacrifices in one area or the other. And we haven't managed to achieve that yet. We've really struggled with allowing that flexibility and allowing the space for people to manage not just part-time or flexible hours, but actually manage a flexible working pattern and incorporate their home life into their working environment. We haven't managed. One of our biggest challenges.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge for a number of companies. And we were talking yesterday about, you know, the level of trust that there is for employees. And, you know, companies talk about, you know, they want to get away from the culture of presenteeism, but equally then they set up a flexible working policy, and the very word policy gives it structure. So, you know, it's not actually that flexible if it's been all laid out, really. So, you know, a lot of that I think is down to the individuals and you know, it's unique conversations with each individual. But I guess when the culture is there that, okay, we're open to more flexible ways of working, and we trust for you to deliver on these goals, on these targets, on your performance, but we'll allow you to do it in a way that also works for you. You know, that can be quite a scary step, I think, for a company when you've got, you know, shareholders and things to deliver to. But equally, I think it's, you know, for me, it's those baby steps once you start taking them and you start to see the success. And generally when people are given, you know, they give back. So, you know, it does tend to breed that culture of more loyalty, more commitment, more trust.
Yes, yes.
And what was your experience personally? So I know you said, you know, your little boy is 6 now. So in terms of you having to juggle and manage just as a mum, you know, is it predominantly you that's looking after all the at-home bits and bobs, you know, the day-to-day? Because that's something I know that's often talked about and says, you know, for real equality, for real parity, we need men coming to, you know, the kitchen table as much as coming to the boardroom table, again, from sort of Sheryl Sandberg's lean in philosophy. And I think that's something for me that I feel really strongly about. You know, it's not going to be possible for women to rise up the ranks if they're not being given the support at home, if they've got a partner, you know, if they're choosing to have a family.
Yeah, and I was very fortunate in my husband went part-time, so that some of the pressure, so we had a mix of my husband doing some of the childcare so that I could come back full-time, and using a local nursery. But he had more flexibility in the role that he was doing to allow him to manage on a daily basis if childcare meant that he was going to be slightly late or have to work slightly different hours. So I was very fortunate, and you're right that the bringing the male into that environment is hugely beneficial in helping you support. But what I went through though was still the emotion of feeling that role, and in a very traditionalist way, which is actually quite unlike me, feeling that the role that he was doing was the role I should be doing. So emotionally I struggled for a long time when I came back to work, not feeling in any way, shape or form that my son wasn't getting what he needed. He just got it from the other parent rather than, but I personally felt like I was failing him, that should have been me in his early years providing that support and that network for him in the home. But it certainly helped me come back and be able to continue with my career.
I mean, I think there's so many more women now who are, you know, juggling family and a career, and you've got so many women now, sort of Natalie Massenet and Nicola Hollick, and you know, just a whole host of women, Karen Brady, who have really in all sorts of diverse industries, who are saying, you know, I want to have a career and I want to have a family. And I know Karen Brady, you know, said, I'm a working mum. I'm a mum who works. You know, I love my career. I love my family. And I think, you know, it is a move forward to say, you know, I actually love both. Okay, it's not easy to do both, but I love both, and I do want to try and find a way.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, for some, you know, want to stay with the more sort of traditional stereotypes and work with that. But I think there's often compromises that are being made, and I'm seeing more and more of my clients and friends, some friends who are doing things in a different way and finding their own balance. But I think when you have the support of your company, you know, it's much easier. But it's interesting. Thank you for being so candid with your feelings, because I think you're not the odd one out. You know, I think for a lot of women that work, you know, they feel guilty for enjoying their career. They feel guilty for you know, prioritizing that. But actually, I think as role models, you know, as setting that example to your children as well, is actually a very important thing. So it's a huge issue. It's not just, you know, it can't be just taken in isolation. I think it's you know, it's going to play a big part as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree, and some of what I struggled with, and some of the pressure I put on myself, which I have quite open discussions with people now, with ladies coming back into the workplace, is that often you put that pressure on yourself. You set your expectations too high on feeling that you have to, that you failed if you don't do anything other than 100% in both. And actually in the early phases, you know, looking back, I think actually I didn't need to give 110% in both. I didn't need to worry about the perception of I can't do childcare 3 days a week, or I couldn't leave at 4 o'clock 2 days a week, because what on earth would people around me think if I did that? So I used to sit at my desk and think, I can't possibly leave yet, it's too early. But I had no need to be there, because my manager was absolutely supportive. People knew that I was giving 110% and that I would probably log on in the evening and do a little bit more work. But it took me a couple of years to become comfortable with that in myself. And that's terrible looking back. And I think I was the only one who put that pressure on myself. It wasn't 3M, it wasn't the organisation I was part of, it was me personally.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, and I think, you know, we all bring different sort of emotions to the table when we go through a transition, when we go through a change, and I think that's why it's really useful to have some sort of coaching program or mentoring where you can check in with somebody and they can say, you know what, actually, perhaps look at this in a slightly different way. What sort of support does 3M have in terms of its maternity support? Do they have any coaching or mentoring? I know you mentioned the women's leadership.
Yeah.
How does that work?
That's something very new, and this aspect is something that we're going to start introducing into that network. So we had one session, that was great support of our MD. Really showed his true value in the topic and endorsement to it.
Is he a parent?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yeah.
Has he got daughters?
That's a question. I think he has. Yes, I think he has a son and a daughter, or possibly 3. But yes, he's very much a family person, and clearly has done exceptionally well in his career. So you know, the network has been great, and we're now in the formalization of, so what are some of the topics? And the reason that I got more involved in this is that often the coaching comes from HR. So the coaching comes from HR. So you play an HR role, but also for those of us that have gone through this transition ourselves, you can give some sense of, this is how I felt through this. We try to connect them to other mums that have come back, who they can open up and have a conversation with. I think all too often when you come back, you feel that it is just you and you're unique and you're struggling, and that it's not okay to open up and be honest and have a conversation with somebody about that. So we try to encourage people to talk to a mentor. So we have mentoring programs in place, not specifically for this, but it's part of that, the bigger picture, to say, have a talk to somebody, understand how they did it, understand some of the challenges, almost make yourself feel better about how you're feeling, that as you quite rightly say, that it's quite normal. It's not unique to you as an individual. And part of the program with the Women's Leadership Network now will to be look at, can we have a breakfast session where we do have a group of our younger, high potential aspiring people that at some point will want a family or possibly will want a family, and how do they feel about that, and how has the workplace shaped them already, because it's a very different place than it was sort of 20 years ago when I first came into it. So there's some really good positive support in place for people, but it tends to start with HR at the moment.
And I think seeing that it's possible, I think having role models within your own company is really inspiring. I know I worked in the corporate market for a time, and I stepped out because, you know, the people above me weren't having families, and I just looked at that and thought, I'm not sure that's going to work for me. And you know, it's interesting because we are very affected and influenced by people around us, and I think when you see somebody who's doing it and doing it well, you know, it can open up that dialogue. And I do think it's a dialogue that starts very early, often in the career, you know, before you're even necessarily, you know, with the partner that you're going to have children with. It's still useful to have that conversation and to say, is this something that you see, this is the kind of trajectory that is open to you if you choose to go down that route, and just to make it less sort of intimidating or feeling like it's impossible, as perhaps it used to be. I think making it really open and seeing how it can shift. And I know from the conversation I had on Tuesday with Dr. Victoria Bourne, where we talked about the changes in the pregnancy mind, and the pregnancy hormones do actually slow down the left side of the brain, the left hemisphere of the brain. So it's much harder to do analytical, detailed work, and your brain actually allows itself to open on the right side or become, you know, more expanded, to be more creative, more intuitive. And to access that inner wisdom. And obviously the purpose of that primarily is to connect with your newborn, to connect with your baby before it's born, but also to connect with your newborn when it arrives. But the benefit of that is that actually in a work environment you can be much more bigger picture, you can have much more lateral thinking, you can be much better at conflict resolution, you can be you know, there's lots and lots of skills that can come to the table, but what we tend to focus on is actually what's being lost, in that the detail and the analytical is going away. And if somebody is in a role where that's quite a key part of their position, working up until quite late in their pregnancy can be very difficult. And one thing I'm looking at with my clients is when they transition out of the workplace a little bit sooner, perhaps around sort of 7-8 months, as opposed to right near the end, they actually transition back in more smoothly the other side, and don't necessarily take their full year's maternity leave the other side, because they have a smoother transition and can manage coming back. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think, again, whether it's self-determined pressure or just the reality of some, particularly in big organisations, the way work is, everybody tends to try and work up until that very last moment. And I certainly did. I was at work until 4 days before my son was born. What that didn't enable me to do was to actually have some space and some relaxation, and to switch off from the work environment, which meant that the early days after birth were, I think, impacted by the fact that my brain was almost all focused on all the things that I hadn't done, because I hadn't taken that time out to actually allow my body and my mind and everything to recover and think about the next phase. The next phase just sort of happened. And I would certainly advise against doing that. I can see a huge amount of benefit from taking that time up front to allow yourself to have more of that transition phase.
I definitely agree. I mean, that's what my work is all about, actually, helping women during that transition phase. And often I'll start working with them quite early in their pregnancy to build up to when they're due to go on maternity leave, so that they're getting support. They've got time when they're allowing themselves some space, but actually, you know, really having some quality space when you do slow down and switch off. It's not just the physical. We often focus on the sort of physical aspects of slowing down physically, you know, putting your feet up and you know, eating well and doing some yoga or whatever. But actually the mind really does need to slow down, and when you're pushing through that, it's not healthy as far as I'm concerned, and the research seems to back that up. And actually I think if the culture of companies allowed women or encouraged women to actually step back a little bit sooner, I think that would be a healthier process. And I know from talking to a lot of the women that I do, the ones that do step out have a much better experience. They have a much happier, much healthier experience. But often it comes about because they're advised by their medical support, by their obstetrician, to actually step back. Very rarely it will be their employer saying step back. Occasionally that does happen.
Yeah.
If they've got a lot of travel and things in their role, but you know, generally it doesn't. And also, as you said, it comes a lot from themselves. You know, that pressure of wanting to say, I'm still managing, I'm still here, I may be carrying a baby, but I'm still, you know, superwoman as well, and I can do this, that, and the other. And I think actually, you know, if as a society we valued what was happening in pregnancy to a higher degree, and we actually value that later part of the pregnancy process and the early part of new motherhood as a time to really give some space, I think it would be really beneficial. And you know, I mean, the statistics from Victoria's research is showing that, you know, it takes at least sort of 3 or 4 months post-birth for the brain to start to kind of rebalance and to go back. And they think actually it goes on for much longer, and they're going to widen the parameters of their research. So I know it was in a conversation yesterday, it wasn't recommended that anybody, by one of my colleagues actually who works for Shell, another very big organisation, her experience was that, you know, coming back to work pre-6 months shouldn't be recommended for anybody, because it's very difficult to make rational decisions in that space. And that's not based on your intelligence, on your capabilities, on you as an individual. That's on your biology. You know, that's looking at it from that perspective. And I think that's what I see is a lot of women try and fight against that and say, well, I'm better than that. I've kind of evolved to be a more superior being than you know, the rest of the world. And actually what I see, having worked with many women for a long time, is that actually that is the case for pretty much everybody. And when they allow that space, it does make a massive transition. But I think the fear, as you say, going back to the fear of not even wanting to share your pregnancy in the beginning, you know, carries on through, so that women don't really want to share, that they want to slow down. I think there's a, you know, a real competitive sort of edge to it, and women don't want to sort of say, you know what, actually I'm going to step out of this. You know.
Yeah.
And I don't know what we can do about it except sort of raise awareness, start a conversation. And as you say, I think a lot of it comes from the top. I think when you've got a board who's supportive, an MD who's supportive, you know, and it starts to come down. And I think, you know, the desire from the bottom up as well can be, you know, really powerful when you've got a new generation coming through who want to do things differently, have seen perhaps what their parents did or their grandparents and said, actually, I'd like to do things a bit differently. You know, but it's not something that's going to change overnight. But I think if there's a willingness to open up a conversation about it and look at some of the facts, and look at some of the research that is available to productivity, because that's ultimately what I'm focusing on, is the productivity for the companies and the productivity for the individuals, so that everybody is a win-win.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I often, because of the type of role I have and the coaching environment that I operate in, I tend to be focusing on the kind of the career professionals in the sort of the higher middle management levels. But the challenges, as you quite rightly say, exist all the way down the organisation. We have a lot of people in administrative roles who are not necessarily striving for an upward career in the organisation, but are looking for continued fulfilment in their current role, and they are struggling too. They struggle to come back because actually they are probably the one that is solely responsible for the childcare. You know, that they're the one that has to do the drop-off and has to do the phoning up in the morning if the child is unwell and the nursery won't take them, or the school. So, you know, we've got a huge population here of people that are are not looking for the upward progression in their career, but also are still really struggling and add so much value to the organisation, and we're not supporting them in quite the same way as we could as well.
Mm. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes the more senior you get, the easier it can get in some respects, because there is the trust, there is the value, you know, there is the salary, so that you can put things in place. And I know from my clients, the more senior they are, in some ways, the more flexibility they do have. You know, they don't have to ask everybody, they're in charge, so, you know, they can make up some of their own rules. Whereas I think if you're sort of lower management, you know, or a sort of more general grade, then it can be more challenging, because you know, your role doesn't really sort of allow for that. So I think it's affecting it on all levels. But in terms of women progressing to a more senior level in 3M, you were saying, you know, the numbers really shift. It's sort of 60-40. And then goes to perhaps sort of 80-20. So what sort of piece of advice would you give to a woman in 3M who was really ambitious and wanted to progress her career, but also to have a family?
Gosh, that's a very interesting
big question.
and you know, I look at my own career, and I reflect and think, have I done it well? I'm not sure. I have worked ridiculous hours, so the sacrifice for me has not been wanting to sacrifice at work, and has not been wanting to sacrifice the time with my son and my family. So it's come at the cost of sacrificing sleep and sacrificing my own personal time and space to fill the work in that point, or to dedicate all the time to my family. I would absolutely say to people, you know, that there's a better way of managing it than that. That you don't have to put that level of pressure. You don't need to continue to keep proving to everybody else. You know, it's that, and that willingness to please other people. It doesn't need to exist. I think you have to just be really true to yourself and reflect and say, okay, if I'm going to make this work, what do I need to change? And some of that is about changing your own mental attitude. But 3M at the moment, because of the pressures and the environment and the pace at which this organisation works, it hasn't found the right support mechanisms to allow women to not feel that pressure. It's very hard to operate at the more senior levels without having to do long hours and some travel to a degree, and not perhaps strike the right balance. So it's a question that I wish I had a much better answer for, because at the moment the organisation hasn't quite shifted to the point where the ownership is all with the individual. It absolutely isn't. There's only so much that you can do to manage your own career and work-life balance existing in a corporation as 3M at the moment. It's got some way to go in allowing people to navigate through that, allowing the seniority not to really impact their ability to have a place at home and in the family. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the thing. And, you know, as you say, if you know, your price was sort of compromising your health or your well-being and sleep, you know, that in the long term is not an ideal solution, and not something that's sustainable. And you're not going to be showing up in either place, at home or at work, and making your best decisions, making your best choices. So even though that seems like the simplest compromise to make, in actual fact it's impacting everywhere anyway. So I know in Arianna Huffington's book, The Third Metric, she talks about, you know, we're very focused on success and money as being the two measures of success up until now, but actually the third metric is well-being and happiness. And actually stepping back and working out, what are our real values? You know, what is it about getting up the ladder that we want to achieve? You know, is it about wanting to make a difference? Is it about wanting to have our voice heard? Is it about wanting to, you know, earn more money? What is the drivers for you? You know, and looking at that on an individual level, and then seeing, is it all about just moving up the career, or is it, you know, can those be fulfilled in other ways? And I think when we look for fulfillment all round, then it can often be a much better process. But working out what are your drivers, so that when you get there, you say, do you know, I'm really glad I made some of those choices, because I'm thrilled to bits. And actually I've enjoyed the journey as well. The journey's been amazing too, because I think we can get very caught up in the destination and in the focus. of where we're heading, and actually the day-to-day stops being fun, and none of us know how long we're going to be here for. And I'm a real believer in if you're not enjoying each day to its full potential, then or certainly we can't have fantastic days every single day perhaps, but good days most times is really important. And I think you do bring your best self to work when it stops feeling like work, when it's part of your passion. So I think being able to carve out roles that are kind of unique to you as well, I think is very important. And that's obviously a challenge in a corporation when things are quite structured. But actually being able to see, and as an HR, I imagine this is probably one of your biggest challenges, is seeing each person as an individual and seeing their career progression and their development as a whole as being, very unique, very personal. And that's where these sort of leadership programs and mentoring programs and things really come into their own, I think, because there's some space for that one-to-one dialogue, so it can really flourish.
I agree, and the one piece of advice I will always say to people is never assume because you see somebody progressing that they've done it perfectly, and that you're a failure because you don't seem to be doing it as well as they are. Talk to them, get that network established, and that's what some of the Women's Leadership Network will really bring value here in this organisation, and some of the coaching and the mentoring, because it's very easy to look around you and think that you've got it all wrong and everyone else has got it all right, and actually. People have all found a different way of managing it, and there is no really wrong or right. It's what
the
works.
work's much more grey than black and white.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, it sounds like 3M have got some great policies in place, and they're definitely moving forward in the right way. And it sounds like your role has a really interesting and sort of challenging career ahead, but is something well worthwhile. And I'd love to kind of keep in touch and follow you in that journey and see how things develop and see how it sort of opens up for the company. So
yeah, absolutely. We're a long way to go. We're a long way to go. I think 3M and society as a whole is changing, but for me it's a really long change process that we've got to go through, and it will be interesting to see where we are in a few years compared to where we are right now.
But I think as a company, having dialogue with other companies can be really helpful, and I think that's something I'm looking to sort of facilitate at the end of this as well. And that was partly why I wanted to sort of start this conversation, because you're not a company in isolation fighting these issues or dealing with these issues. There's many other companies who are as well, and they've learned in different ways. So in the same way that you've got your sort of women's network for that one-to-one support for women to talk to other women who've been through it, for me it makes sense for other companies to talk to other companies and see, okay, how are you doing it? And there's amazing companies in media and in publishing who are really sort of breaking throwing away the rule book and just saying we're going to do it completely differently. And I'm looking into their policies and processes and seeing how they manage it. How do they get more of an equal balance? How do they get people moving up and fulfilling their own potential? I think that's it. Whether you're male or female, it shouldn't really matter. It's more about what is your potential, what are your unique skills, what do you bring to the table, and then where is the best environment for you to deliver those, so that everybody can thrive. So yeah, so okay, so thank you so much for the conversation. I know I could talk to you for a lot longer and ask you many questions, but I think we've had a great chat today and certainly covered some interesting points, which I hope will be put my teeth in again, which I hope will be useful to our audience when they listen in again. So thank you very much for your time today, Katherine.
Thank you for it's a topic I feel quite passionate about, and to be able to share it has been a great opportunity, so thank you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.